Welcome back. You are watching Gravitas. On the next big discussion tonight, Donald Trump is in a hurry to deliver all that he promised during his presidential campaign. Later on Wednesday, he will sign an order to begin constructing the Mexican border wall. To discuss this segment, we continue our conversation with Mr. Pramit Pal Chowdhury, the foreign editor for Hindustan Times, as well as our correspondent and bureau chief in Washington, D.C., Giles Gibson. Thank you both for joining in on the discussion. We'll get to you in just a minute, but first, some perspective on the story. President Trump has hit the ground running just days after his inauguration on Friday. He started by withdrawing from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He's now clearing plans to build a wall along the Mexican border that could cost more than $30 billion. President Trump has sounded off his plans for building the wall on the Mexican border, typically in a tweet. He quoted, "Big day planned on national security tomorrow. Among many other things, we will build a wall," end quote. The inflow of Syrian refugees is expected to be stopped indefinitely. Safe zones in Syria will be identified, and the total number of refugees to be allowed entry this year will be limited to 50,000. The wall, according to an estimate drawn up by a team of consultants, will stretch 700 miles along the U.S. border with Mexico, not the full length of 1,800 odd miles, since the argument is there are enough natural barriers to deter illegal immigrants. The wall could be of precast concrete, about 50 feet high and 10 feet below ground, to deter those who try to get in with a tunnel. The estimated price tag could be as high as $20 billion. Another $500 million will be needed for laying access roads and other infrastructure. The final price tag could exceed more than $30 billion, and not including the maintenance. All right, to get perspective on this story, let's now go to Giles Gibson joining us from Washington, D.C. Giles, thanks so much for joining us. In a few hours, Trump could make this announcement at that meeting. Trump seems to be in a hurry to make sure that he fulfills all of his promises that he made on the campaign trail. Now, is this surprising? A lot of people thought that this may or may not even happen, that these were just comments that Trump made during his campaign, but now a lot of that seems to be coming into fruition.
Yeah, Archie, there was a lot of skepticism about this whole idea during the campaign, but it's perhaps not a big surprise that Donald Trump is pressing ahead with starting the project. Of course, on the very first day when he announced his intention to run for the Republican nomination, he talked about illegal immigration from Mexico and about building this wall. And of course, throughout the campaign, other issues like promoting American jobs and other sort of issues came to the fore. But this idea of a wall on the Mexican border with the U.S. has been a chief sort of campaign promise right from the very first day that he decided to run. So I think a lot of political analysts, there's skepticism about how the project will actually be built, how it will be, whether it will be successful. But I don't think there's any surprise that Donald Trump is expected to announce his intention to start work.
Let me now go to Pramit Pal. With regards to immigration, do we think that this wall will actually help? Will this actually prevent illegal immigrants from coming into the United States along this new wall that Trump is proposing?
It probably will, in the sense that any barrier would reduce at least some illegal migration. The point is that there actually isn't very much illegal migration from Mexico these days. If the statistics are anything to go by, since the U.S. economy crashed in 2008, the actual number of Mexicans leaving the United States is actually greater than those coming in. The other thing is that a large portion of Mexican migration now is covered by short-term visas for agricultural workers. So that's already legalized.
Right.
So the actual number of illegal migrants is actually quite small. We don't know the exact numbers, but they have dropped quite dramatically. And as I said, it's actually a net outflow of Mexicans from Mexico to the United States. So in many ways, what he's doing is a symbolic act, because that's what, as we mentioned, that's what he promised his constituency. And that's really the overriding theme of the Trump presidency right now, is that I was elected because of a group of very angry white working class people, and I have to show that I will actually deliver on at least some of those elements. The one part of the wall promise that he made, which I'm pretty certain will not happen, is that he said he would get Mexico to pay for it. And I don't really see how that's going to happen. And Mexico says, quite rightly, why in the world should we pay for a wall that's on the American side anyway?
Let's go back to that discussion with regards to cost. Let's bring in Giles now. With regards to the cost, Giles, is it going to be difficult for Trump to get Congress to approve this? Clearly, Mexico has indicated that they are not going to pay for this. Who's ultimately going to foot the bill, and how will this impact taxpayers?
Well, that's right, Archid. Donald Trump has estimated that the wall could cost anything between $8 billion and $10 billion. So, as you were mentioning earlier, actually, some of the sort of independent voices are saying, independent experts are saying it could be up to $25 billion to build the kind of barrier that Donald Trump has been talking about during the campaign. There was a lot of sort of skepticism and a lot of talk about whether Donald Trump would need US Congress approval in order to press ahead with this project. But his team believe that there's existing legislation in place, the 2006 Secure Fence Act, which has already been passed, which they say allows them to get on with the business of actually starting to design and build this wall. The question is, if the costs go up to as high as some of those estimates at around $25 billion, it's not clear whether that legislation allows Donald Trump to spend that kind of money on this barrier project.
And if it was as simple as building a wall, between the United States and Mexico, many states there, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, of course, is this actually going to prevent illegal migrants from trying to get across to the mainland USA? There's certainly access to the waterways as well if somebody really wants to do it. And flights obviously are private jets, more than one way for someone to really cross the border if they need to. So is this hefty cost and this actual wall that's really putting a divide between mainland US and Mexico really going to solve its purpose?
Well, exactly. Some of the analysis I've been reading, sort of border security experts, they've been saying that basically there is no way of building a barrier along a 2,000-mile long border that's going to stop illegal immigration entirely. It's simply not possible. There are huge geographical challenges as well. There's a lot of the border is owned in private hands. There's all sorts of areas, very remote areas with incredibly difficult terrain. So the idea that you could build a sort of impermeable barrier across a whole 2,000-mile border between the US and Mexico is simply being. There's a huge amount of skepticism about whether that's even possible amongst experts in the field.
Let me go back to Pramit Pal now with regards to that. What about, to actually maintain that? Once it's built, once it's done, there's estimates that, you'll have to hire many agents to monitor it and really track that. What about all the other costs, the side effects of building this wall to really make sure it solves its purpose?
Well, actually, that may be something Trump may be looking forward to because, fundamentally, his #1 economic policy promise has been that I will create working-class jobs. And
a way to bring in jobs sort of indirectly.
To create a wall, building the wall and having people man it is actually a good way to produce jobs. It's a very expensive way to produce jobs,
right,
but you will produce jobs as a consequence.
Right.
And they'll be relatively low-skilled jobs. You don't have to do very much to just walk up and down and look. And what you probably do is lose a lot of CCTV across the walls. That'll be a maintenance issue. But yes, the point is that, keep this in mind, if you go back through recent American history, almost every second American president has promised to seal the border with Mexico. It's a long-standing policy promise. I remember I met the Mexican foreign minister when she came here recently to India, and her response was, we've heard this before, and nothing ever happens. I mean, they do something, they build it, and then as we mentioned, it doesn't work fundamentally. And if there is a demand for jobs, that farmers in California need labor, then the market will provide. Somehow, the guys will get across. And one of the key means by which people get across such borders is corruption in the border forces, the border security men, who are not normally very well paid. And if 500 Mexicans come in and said, "Hey, we'll give you each of us will give you $1,000." He's saying, "Hey, that's worth it.
Right.
I'll just open the gate and let you in, or switch off the CCTV and you go and climb it."
When, you know, if Trump's whole mission to get rid of illegal immigrants with the border is certainly one option, but certainly there are illegal immigrants possibly from other parts of the world, and you can't put a border or restrict that. How is that going to be impacted? I mean, even from South Asia, many people who are brought there to be servants or maids, to, you know, the domestic help.
Yeah.
What is that going to be tackled? How will that be?
Well, we'll see what he does. I mean, what you're talking about is the issuance of temporary visas. So I come on a tourist visa, I come on a student visa, and then I essentially jump ship.
But could that be now be stricter because of this?
Well, he's restricted H-1B visas. He's moving to doing that by at least raising the cost of such visas.
Right.
But that's really a very small portion of workers and who are very tightly monitored anyway. So far, there's no evidence that he's never said anything about restricting legal migration into the United States. He's only talked about illegal migration.
Right.
So legal migrants who come in and then jump ship from move from a temporary visa to a long-term. The point is that that already exists, the means of throwing those out. Under Barack Obama's presidency, 8 years, he threw out 6 million illegal migrants. I mean, it was actually the largest number of illegal migrants in a two-term U.S. presidency ever. And he wasn't even opposed to them. He just said that the normal legal methods and procedures, even then, it was almost impossible to get rid of. There's millions of other illegal migrants who had come in, as you've mentioned, on temporary visas and decided to stay. And at the state level, most of the states have just given up. They said it's not worth my time to spend literally tens of thousands of dollars to track down one guy who then gets a lawyer, who then fights, and then I've spent another $10,000, $20,000 for 5 years in a court to get him thrown out of the country. I got better things to do with my money.
Right.
So the net result is a lot of that is done at the state level. It's not done at the federal level. And it's just the cost and the trouble is way too much. And I think what we'll see is as the American economy is very likely to boom over the next 2 or 3 years, partly because of projects like the Great Wall of America, we'll see this huge surge in the number of migrants coming to the United States looking for jobs. And I think we'll find that Trump will realize or quietly ignore this after a couple of years when he realizes really nothing he can do about it.
All right, let's bring Giles back into the conversation. Giles, you know, it's only been a couple of days now, in fact, since Trump has officially taken office. Many of these things we heard on the campaign trail, many of his bold statements, including the wall, certainly other things like repealing Obamacare, banning Muslims, and a lot of people concerned that these were just things that he talked about, but now a lot of them are actually coming into a reality. What's the mood like there in the United States with regards to Trump and making some of these executive orders so fast?
Well, you mentioned the fact that much of his actions, in fact, almost all of his actions, has been through executive orders. And that's being interpreted in the sort of the political chatter here as Trump signaling his intentions. He can't do all that much through these executive actions. I mean, you mentioned Obamacare. That was that executive action which he issued on his very first day in office. That was actually to do with scaling back some of the associated costs to do with Obamacare. And again, with this executive order, which we're expecting about building the wall, this is an executive order to start directing federal funds towards building the wall with Mexico. So what Donald Trump is doing here is using executive orders, not exactly to deliver immediately on some of these promises. There may have to be legislation. He may have to go to the US Congress in order to really make progress on issues like Obamacare and immigration. But what he's doing here is using these executive orders to signal to his constituency, to the people who voted for him, that he is starting to actually take action on some of the issues that he highlighted during the campaign.
You know, in the next couple of weeks, Mexico's president is also expected to be in the United States visiting Trump. What type of a conversation do we think is going to happen between Trump and, you know, do we expect anything with the cost coming up, or do you think Trump will still, no matter what, build a wall, even if that means the United States will have to pay for it?
Well, that's going to be the central issue of those discussions. I can't see how Enrique Peña Nieto, the Mexican president, will come to the US and will hold talks with Donald Trump, and that issue won't come up. But if you look at some of the Mexican press, if you look at how this is being played out in Mexico itself, it would be seen as political suicide, really, for a Mexican president to agree to pay billions of dollars towards a wall along the Mexican-US border, which is going to be on the US side. It would it would simply be political suicide for Enrique Peña Nieto to do that. So that's going to be the real challenge if Donald Trump wants to deliver on this promise of not just building this wall, but actually getting Mexico to pay for it. It's very, very difficult to see how any Mexican administration would actually agree to foot the bill for this.
Let me bring up Roman Paul back into the conversation with regards to U.S. and Mexican relations continuing forward with the Trump administration. Certainly the wall is one of the barriers that's being putting up. What do you think the people of in Mexico are going to react to this? Certainly not too thrilled, but how will this affect relation between U.S. and Mexico when it comes to other factors?
Well, I think the biggest issue will be Trump's promise to begin to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Right.
Yeah. Because that really is the basis of the very deep integration of the economies of Mexico and the United States. So if he says, I want to renegotiate this, that is going to be, I think, the real crux of the problem between the two countries, because Mexico will obviously resist or demand concessions in return. And then, of course, Canada has to be part of this as well. And we're going to see where that goes. But what has happened, in effect, is that over the decades, Mexico and America's economy, especially in the issue of so-called supply chains. If I'm a General Motors company, I've built factories and component parts, all essentially assuming that Mexico and the United States are the same economic zone.
Right.
Suddenly I'm told President of the United States, I'm going to put a wall across this. I'm going to break the tariff concessions and so on. For General Motors, it's going to be enormously disruptive. Suddenly, I'll have car factories in America where the engines are being made in Mexico and the gears are being made in Canada, and I can't put them together anymore. Or if I put them together, I have to pay a huge amount of tariff to do so. Or vice versa. The engine may be made in America and the car is being assembled in Mexico. The cost of that disruption is going to be huge. Because of the deep integration between the two countries. And I think Mexico can rightly say, will expect American industry to come running to the president and say, this is going to cost us $1 trillion to do this. We will have to completely disassemble huge numbers of our plants and so on in Mexico and ship them over, or vice versa.
Right.
Because costs are higher in America, we may ship our factories to the Mexican side.
Right.
And I think that's going to be the crux of the debate between the two. And it'll be very curious to see whether Trump can actually get a renegotiation of NAFTA done in a manner that doesn't cost America an enormous amount of money.
Giles, let's go back to you now with regards to what happened on Friday and then Saturday. We saw the crowds that turned up at the nation's capital there with the inauguration, and then the day after, the huge marches, the women's marches across the country, not just in Washington, D.C., certainly sending a message loud and clear to the Trump administration. Now that the news of his wall, the announcement coming in a few hours there in the United States, what type of reaction will this evoke, and could there be more protests in the coming days?
I wouldn't be surprised to see protests against these moves in terms of immigration policy, Archie. Of course, the Mexican Wall project is really dominating the headlines. But Donald Trump is also expected to make a couple of other executive orders today, one of them being cutting down on the refugee program. So countries like Iraq and Syria, where thousands of refugees, people in desperate need really, have been coming into the U.S. Over the last few years. The vetting process has been extremely tight, but people have been getting in from countries like Syria and Iraq, which are in incredible crisis at the moment. Donald Trump is expected to cut off, it's expected at least for the next few months, if not longer, access from those countries for refugees. So I think that could be a real talking point once this debate over the Mexican Wall starts to subside. The fact that the U.S. is closing its borders to people who are coming from countries like Syria and Iraq in desperate need.
And this may be a little bit too early to sort of predict or understand how this is going to pan out, but what about Canada's relationship with the United States? Its northern border, the fact that the United States is taking so much of to curb back on illegal immigrants with Mexico, could this impact, if any, the relationship with Canada, or perhaps could some of the folks in Mexico maybe was Canada an option for them? Those people who, could this maybe improve the relationship between Mexico and Canada and sort of leave the U.S. on its own to say?
Yeah, well, I think the big touching point when you talk about Donald Trump and how his policies are affecting Canada so far is, of course, through the trade deals. Canada was a signatory not to just a NAFTA, but also the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So Donald Trump is essentially pulling America out of two massive trade deals that Canada stand to benefit from and want to be a part of. So I think that's going to be a real concern in the Canadian capital is how they're going to deal with America on a trade basis if Donald Trump is pulling America out of these big multilateral trade deals that Canada have been heavily involved in as well.
All right, Giles, we're going to get back to you in just a minute, but we're going to continue this conversation with another angle with what's going on with Donald Trump. Well, a Secret Service agent, Carrie O'Grady, took to Facebook in a post back in October of last year and said that she would not take a bullet for Donald Trump if he were elected the president. Quote, "As a public servant for nearly 23 years, I struggle not to violate the Hatch Act, so I keep quiet and skirt the median. To do otherwise can be a criminal offense for those in my position, despite the fact that I'm expected to take a bullet for both sides. But this world has changed, and I have changed, and I would take jail time over a bullet or an endorsement for what I believe to be disastrous to this country and the strong and amazing women and minorities who reside here. The Hatch Act be damned, I am with her." End quote. Now, this post has now again surfaced and it's trending on social media sites. There are already calls for her dismissal. The post of the Secret Service agent might be from the time when Trump was just a candidate for the president, but this type of statement coming from a Secret Service agent is disturbing. The Secret Service agent is the first line of protection from any kind of attack. That they harbor the thoughts like this is worrisome, as this makes the president a soft target for attacks. Giles, getting back to this angle of the story, we know that the post is old from last year, but still rather concerning that maybe some say that this is maybe not the place, and these are types of comments that Secret Service agents should not be talking about, regardless of their position when it comes to immigration, women, minorities. How do we perceive this this opinion that was posted out with not wanting to defend the president, now Donald Trump?
Yeah, Archer, just to give our viewers a bit of background on this, the post mentioned something called the Hatch Act several times, and that's long-standing legislation from the 1930s, actually. It's been amended a few times since, but it's very well respected, and it's a long-standing tradition and actually a law that federal employees of the U.S. government are not allowed to be politically active or make sort of political statements. So,
right.
So these Facebook posts by this Secret Service agent not only are going against that, but she's bringing into question her commitment in terms of whether she would do her job as an agent. And
a real quick reaction now from Pramit Pal with regards to this as we wrap up. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's very unprofessional. Ultimately, if you're in a democracy, you have to respect that a certain person has won, whether you like that person or not, has won an election. And as a Secret Service or as any security provider, your job is to protect the office of the president, not the person of the president. In other words, the personality is irrelevant to you. And if that person is somebody you don't like or don't care for, is irrelevant. It was unprofessional, and frankly, she can't be trusted with being a Secret Service agent anymore, in my opinion.
All right, thank you so much for your perspective. Pramit Pal Chaudhry joining us with your thoughts on both Brexit as well as Trump, and Giles Gibson joining us from Washington, D.C. With that, we're going to be closing this edition of Gravitas. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for tuning in. News continues on the other side of the break. Good night.